Hello and welcome. We are in New York for Swift Business Forum, and I'm now joined by Schwartz, who is the Head of Research and Analysis of FinTech at PwC. Aaron, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
So we've seen investors' interest in FinTechs perhaps cooling off a bit of late. What is keeping them excited? Which areas?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We saw a big wave of FinTech funding, especially in 14 and 15, as there was a lot of capital that came in the space, and it really cooled off a little bit in 16 along with the broader markets. Since then, we've seen some stabilization. It's really been within a very range-bound area in terms of quarterly funding, but I still think there is quite a bit of interest in FinTech. I think there are some signs the space is maturing a little bit, and so we've seen companies think about moving from B2C to B2B models, and so there's a lot of interest in really finding the real innovation, because there's a lot of Me Too companies in the space, and really thinking about scale and adoption. I don't think that happened as much in the early years because there was so much new technology innovation in the space, but I think the venture firms are really thinking about how can they scale their solutions, either within partnership or independent, into the financial services ecosystem.
So you have a privileged point of view from which to oversee the most interesting trends in this area. What can we expect in the future?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of industry trends. I think, as I talked about, we're seeing a lot of companies think about pivoting from B2C to B2B because new customer acquisition is extremely challenging. I think blockchain or distributed ledger technology certainly is an area that saw a lot of excitement even in last year, and we're really spending a lot of time understanding what are the appropriate use cases. How do we think about adoption? How do we think about the governance model around an open architecture? And so I think we're going and rationalizing the use cases around that. Blockchain is also interesting from a venture perspective because it's much broader than financial services. And so it could be in healthcare, it could be in energy, but there's a number of other industries that's seeing a lot of interest in blockchain as well. And I think that certainly is appealing from a venture investment standpoint.
And talking about trends, I wanted to ask you about something that has been mentioned earlier in the conversations here, which is reverse takeovers. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That came up on the panel a little bit today. As we think about where FinTech goes from here, where the funding goes from here, I don't know if it will just sort of be range bound or it will be the same status quo as we've seen. And so we've talked about, with still uncertain regulatory environment or climate, around financial services, is there the opportunity for an unforeseen event to happen? Could a technology company come in and acquire a FinTech company or a bank? There's been some precedent examples around that. Can we think about a reverse merger acquisition? So we look at the numbers around that. With the funding in FinTech, could a FinTech company actually acquire a bank? The economics actually are not, are very acceptable. If you look at the 5,000 or so FDIC banks in the US, 1,400 of those have 100 million in assets or below, which is very scalable when you do basic bank math around that for a FinTech to come in and actually acquire a bank. And so what does that mean? It sort of facilitates lower cost of funding, it facilitates some balance sheet lending, it sort of puts a little bit more certainty on the regulatory path in going down that avenue. So it's certainly an interesting debate and an interesting topic, and it's something that we talk about as one of those unforeseen events that potentially could happen in FinTech.
So this is still very much an exciting space?
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I think it's really understanding the use case, understanding the path to adoption, rather than just looking at innovation for the pure sake of innovation. And so I think that's really the debate that's going on in FinTech right now.
Well, thank you so much for your comments, Aaron.
Sure.